a blast wall on your right that's identical. The tower is in exactly the same position. Their list on the hot row of bunkers is smaller ones on the left, and you can just see it, that the big one that I'm stood next to, if you look down on the smaller picture, you can just see it slightly raised. That's the big one. It's an identical layout. So I worked on an identical nuclear site as that. Is this a nuclear base? Yes. And what else makes it a nuclear base? It's the devil is in the details. The devil in the details. Go back. One. There. Devil in the detail. On a ordinary, conventional storage area, there are 2, maybe, airmen, security. Look how many's on there. Collectively, 38 men on shift. Believe me, that's exactly the numbers I kind of worked on my base. And they're not all on the site. Some are on mobile patrol. The ones on the site, some will be on breaks, but there will always be a walking presence of at least 2 with guns walking round that hot row, just in case James Bond flies in on a hang glider. Believe me, we were told it was Spetsnaz, they're going to come in on gliders. That's what they told us. That's what they said, they're going to glide in. So we always had people out there. So important, and this is important, there are indeed many more witnesses to this case, because I defy anybody to tell me that I'm wrong on this. There are people walking out around on patrol with their guns, at least 2. There's at least 1, probably 2 in the high tower, if you think of the photograph. And as and when anything happened, and bear in mind they would call exercises each night just to keep you on your toes, and you run out to set positions, and it was tiring, once, twice a night. They'd call snap inspections, so you're out. And bear in mind what would happen if we had a real alert of any kind. The people on mobile patrol would immediately move to designated positions around the base. So depending on the scenario of what the emergency was, would depend on where you went to around the base. So you've got all these people, but it's all part of the same shift. Okay? This is an important fact. All right? So when somebody says to you, it's not nuclear, it is. And also, I've been told on many occasions that this is a nuclear base. Yes, my dear?
Why they have nukes up there?
Good question. Good question. The real answer is, at this base, I'm reliably informed, and I have to be careful how I say this, but I have absolutely no doubt about this, that there were more nuclear weapons at that base than in any other in Britain by the US. However, the reason why nobody wants to come out and say that they were there, because they shouldn't have been there. And they broke all the armament agreements. A pretty good reason why they didn't tell you. Yes, so when you go up to the general and say, was there nuclear weapons? I could neither confirm or deny, which is a stock useless answer. But it leaves them people guessing. This is a nuclear base. Okay, now what's important about the nuclear base? What happens on the 3rd night? There are still 2 very key elements to tell you before we go. And I am conscious of the time, and it won't be long. Okay? Is that 10 or 20?
Yeah, can you wrap it up within 20 minutes?
Yeah, I was thinking in less than that, but okay, we'll go 20. Just bought 20 there. Right, here we go. So, all right. Well, what did I just say? There were 2 elements still to cover. Okay, the first element, and this is really, really important. While Halton is out with his team of men in a part of the forest, a second field, bear in mind he's out there supposedly for 4.5 hours. That's the time span within the audio snapshots on his dictaphone, because he's describing things at various times and he puts a time first. So we're looking at a time span of going out to investigate to the time he goes back in, about 4.5 hours. Lots of things are happening, all right? he can't be and his team can't be everywhere, and who knows for certain where they were in relation to others. Okay, two things that's important. Let's set the scene. Holt is out with his team, and they're having their encounters with multiple UFOs. The ones that were in the sky would have been seen without a shadow of doubt by the guy in that tower. Why? Because it's 80 feet high, and as it was, 40 feet higher than any tree surrounding it. And the reason why it's higher is it's got to be because it's a nuclear base, and you don't want somebody sliding in on the hang glider. You need to have full 360. So it has to be higher than everywhere else. So it's higher than all the trees. And all the trees are not allowed to grow beyond a certain height for fear of obscuring the 360. So it never got that high. So that tower was twice as high as any nearby tree, so he could see right out to the, oh my God, it's a lighthouse. That guy knew it was a lighthouse every time he come on. He just looked in that direction, it's a lighthouse. He knew it was there. However, on this night, and this is important, anything above the treetop, the odds are, especially when the radio and it was all getting exciting, it's coming to us, it's coming to us. That guy in the tower, whatever he says, and I think he now denies that anything has happened untowards, I don't believe him. Because it physically, you're not going to be reading your book while UFO is going on. I'm not interested. It's human nature, you'd look. Now let's go to where human nature would take you, to the other 30 or 40 men that were still left and told to hang back while Holt's out with his team. So yeah, still all the same night. Now, if I was one of those men and there was no sergeant, officer telling me what to do, and I'm hearing on the radio, it's coming towards us, it's coming towards us, and you're surrounded by forest, what would you do? What would you more than likely do? You'd go, hey, I'm going to have a look. So they'd start splitting up. I don't know this for certain, but I think this is probably very possible. Okay. We end up with a scenario where probably people are running around like headless chickens trying to get a better vantage point. Now let's just break this down now, because I kind of set the scene here, because this is vitally important. That you understand that there is confusion, there is a large group of men, no supervision probably, everybody is excited, everybody is nervous. What the hell is happening here? Can you imagine on the radio? If somebody said to us now, somebody just rang you up on your mobile and said there's a UFO hanging outside a press club, would we say, oh, okay, I'll leave it? Wow, we're out that door. We're passing past each other. I want to see this. Human nature. You would be curious. So think about that. All right. So basically, we've got this kind of very chaotic scenario with a forest, a group of team out. They're having UFO encounters. Now, bear in mind that one thing I missed is that red light, by the way, that was next to the farmhouse, guess what Colonel Holt, or Lieutenant Colonel Holt, saw, he and his team saw that do. It went, splits into 5 white objects silently, and then goes, one by one, disappeared. So, again, lighthouses that break into 5 lighthouses that disappear in front of an eye, pretty good trip for a lighthouse. Not the lighthouse, okay? But that's what he saw, and that's actually in his memorandum. He saw multiple objects. All right? So basically, that's it. We've got this scene. It's a chaotic scene. Human nature would have mean, I think, that people, and a lot more witnesses are yet to come forward, they will run forward to try to get a better view. Now let's take you to a scenario there. So Holt is over there. Things are happening to him. He won't know what's happening to the others. We have a scenario with Larry Warren. Who said Larry Warren? Right? I never forget Larry Warren out of my presentations because he's one of the true heroes of this. Okay? Absolutely screwed up, one of the biggest victims in all of this. But he's a good guy, and I've met him many times. Psychologically very, very traumatized. Fair enough, Peter? Okay? And his life still is traumatized. As many as John and Jim are traumatized. But Larry Warren, perhaps in some ways, is the biggest one, in my opinion, rightly or wrongly. Larry Warren's account goes like this. He is at a perimeter, middle of nowhere, on the perimeter, little guard on his own, when suddenly a Land Rover or a Jeep turns up and says, get in here. Gets in here, and he effectively goes on a strange journey. So he's picked up and he's taken to what can only be described as a farmer's field. Yeah, motor pool, pick up light holes. I'm trying to speed it through. But he ends up being sent out into a field in darkness. Bear in mind, Larry Warren had just arrived at the base. He was fresh out of training. He'd only got qualified to carry a gun on that base on the 11th of December. So certainly I would suspect that Lieutenant Colonel Holt wouldn't have even known him. Why would he? He's just arrived, just on shift. Greener than grass. So he is picked up, and he is eventually taken to a scenario where it's get out, join that circle of men around a patch of yellow mist that is hovering very close to the ground, just a patch of mist in a field, and there is a circular team of airmen around this. There are 2 British policemen in uniform. There are movie cameras. Bear in mind, 1988, 1980, you have got one on a tripod and one big handheld one, 2 different types of cameras filming this yellow patch of mist. Get and join in that line, the circle. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Imagine, terrifying, if this is the real account, and we'll come to that. But this is what Larry's saying. So basically, stand there, join in that circle. Then all of a sudden, it's coming. What's coming? A red light, small red light comes in from the horizon, stops over the yellow mist. Explosion of light, so bright that Larry is, what we later know, does sustain, and this is physical proof that at that time frame, he sustained kind of like a burn into his eyes, temporary burn into his eyes. Explosion of light. When his eyes clear, he sees, instead of the yellow mist and the little red light, he sees a structured craft where the yellow mist had been. Airmen all around it, movie cameras. He then sees a vehicle pull up from a nearby road. And there aren't many roads where this could be. This is how his account goes. And a senior officer gets out. Now, there is some debate, but there is a reference that this craft has a translucent quality and that possibly several entities of some description are seen in a hazy kind of translucent state within this, very close to the craft. Okay? Keep that in your mind. Let's go back to Holt's team in a different part. Beam's coming down. After the beam had come down, the UFO goes back into the sky. Zip. Back up into the sky. Still these objects are there. And then they notice that one object goes past them in the direction of the base behind them. Not where the lighthouse is. They're looking back from a distance in the direction of the weapons storage area. And they see that the UFO is shining another pencil beam down to the ground. In what they and what Holt believes is in the general direction of the weapons storage area, the nuclear weapon storage area. They're looking back. They can't be certain because of the distance and terrain, but it's in the general direction. Colonel Holt, though, thinks, I'll find out whether those beams are going. So bear in mind, all this is going on at kind of the same time. State of confusion, people running around. Basically, he's then onto his radio, and he can change it to a different frequency, and guess what? He can change a frequency to go up into the tower, the 80-foot tower. So he turns the radio to that frequency and hears he hears the guy in the tower saying, "There are beams coming down into the storage bunkers." So it's confirmed. They're thinking it's in the general direction. He's changed frequency, and he has confirmed that a beam is being shone down into a weapons storage area. Now let's go back to our scenario. Two men walking around, on patrol in the weapons storage area. What do you think would happen if a UFO came over your perimeter and stopped and hovered and shone a beam down at the bunker? What might you do if you were one of those soldiers on patrol? Well, I don't know. We don't know this, but I know that there were more witnesses. What's likely to happen is somebody will have gone and sent an internal alarm on the site. Other officers would have immediately deployed like ants coming from a nest onto that site to fix positions, because that's what they're trained to do. That's what I was trained to do, so I don't think there's going to be any difference. They will go to set positions, but they are going into a scenario that is completely alien to them. So they come running out, so they will be running like ants. What? You can imagine this scenario. Now, I don't preclude that in panic, and I think it would have been blind panic, that some of those officers, probably with entitlement really, fearing for their safety, a beam's coming down, they're thinking nuclear weapons, we're all going to die, the whole place is going to go up. Who knows what happens, but I think it's a perfectly reasonable scenario that in panic something more could have happened. And there may well have been shooting. And you couldn't have blamed them if they had. But all I'm saying is I'm setting a stall that we know for certain that beams are coming down into that bunker, and I know, because I worked on that base, and it's an identical base layout for that storage area, that there would have been people out on patrol, and there is no doubt that if a beam come down, there would have been alarm gone, people would have come out like ants. So there's many more witnesses. And none of those people on the site have ever come forward. Probably because they've seen all the hassle of those that have come forward. Who can blame them? But just shows you how many more witnesses potentially there are to this case. All right? So this is all going on. And you've got a situation where essentially, that's it. The craft puts the beam out from the bunkers, off it goes, all the objects kind of go out to the horizon and gone. Speeding this up now to draw to a close. Missing lots out, but essentially the main incidents have happened. This is the incidents that have happened. But in this case, and what makes it so fascinating and yet incredibly difficult to get your head around, is if this case is as good as I've just described, with all the action I've just described, do you think that the American authorities would want that kind of case coming out? What we know is, with UFOs over 60 years, there is generally a cover-up mode that begins. How do you cover up something that's so multifaceted, so many witnesses, so many different kinds of incidents? So we get into a scenario where some people are interrogated, and they have gone on record. Some people give statements. Some people say that the statements they gave aren't the ones that they actually did. Some people say that the Office of Special Investigations were really the bad guys in all of this and were involved in the investigation. Sergeant Jim Peniston will say that he was interrogated, given sodium pentothal. Draw it for me, draw the picture for me, draw the craft for me. I've drawn it, draw it again. Sodium pentothal. Why do you want to do that? Because we want everything. So they probably got everything. They probably got the symbols. Who knows? But at least 5 people were interrogated. Now, we go into slightly conspiracy mode, but we do know that disinformation happens in all walks of life and not only military life. So if you had this great case, nuclear weapons, beams going down, multiple UFOs, my God, it's a nightmare scenario to try to contain. So maybe. And Holt has always said that many of his men were interrogated unfairly. He was completely left out of the loop. He never even got debriefed. He's the deputy base commander, and he felt distinctly unloved. Nobody talked to him. He was kept completely out of it, which still rankles him to this day. because he never got any closure, no explanations, as none of the men did. But he was not subjected to interrogation. Many were. And I suspect, Holt has always said that he believed his men were interrogated, and he believed that some were messed with, in inverted commas, more than others. One of those that was messed with, according to Lieutenant Colonel Holt at that time, now Colonel Holt retired, was Larry Warren. More things will emerge in time, I have absolutely no doubt. But as things stand now, Holt believes that Larry Warren was interrogated, and we know from Larry himself that he was interrogated, not just once, several times. He was actually physically taken with like a chloroform and taken to an underground facility where he was given a hard time in an unknown, underground, unconfirmed facility. But this is what his memory is saying. And he knows that he fully understands, and I've talked to him at length, he knows he's been messed with. His belief is that what happened when he was out in the forest with the red craft, the mist, and the structure, and the light burning his eyes, he believes that absolutely. But he also knows that he was messed with. So we have a conundrum. An even further conundrum to Larry Warren's account is that 8 years later, having met the lovely Peter Robbins, who became really good friends with him, left at Eastgate, they went back. 8 years later, Larry Warren had not gone back. And here's a conundrum point for you. I'm a police officer, I deal in evidence. They go back. 8 years later, Larry Warren had never been back. They find a field, which he'd never been to in 8 years, and he goes, that's it, that's where it was. Peter says it was instantaneous. Okay, so unusually in the area where he said that's what it was, the soil was noticeably a different colour in the field, in a ploughed field. So they do what they should do as investigators. They took soil samples inside where he said that the discoloration was, and a control sample of ordinary soil outside the discoloration. And guess what they did? They sent it off for forensic testing. And here's where we get this conundrum. The forensic tests absolutely prove that the soil sample from within the darkened area where he said it was, on the ground, was anomalous. Anomalous in the sense of it wouldn't absorb water and it had suffered irradiation from some charge. The soil sample, the control sample outside, was ordinary soil, would accept water, hadn't been irradiated. Question is, why? The problem is in the chain of evidence. It's 8 years later. And it's a conundrum, and it's an anomalous piece of forensic evidence that would point that something exotic happened there.
May I just add, and I won't add all of the anomalous evidence, but this is very close to the sea, and there's a component of sand in the soil, as you would expect. In the control sample, it was normal. In the affected sample, it wasn't sand. It had melted into an interim form of glass.
I'll just repeat that for the microphone, because I see some people at the back. What he's basically saying is that the anomalous sample, the soil had effectively changed to glass. So there'd been a material change. The problem is in terms of evidential sequence. It's 8 years later, we don't know how and why that soil has changed, but it's a conundrum that would indicate that there's some physical evidence that supports that something very strange happened where Larry Warren obviously said it happened. So can you see why this is a very complicated case? Holt will say that Larry's mind was messed with, and he believes that he was implanted with a false memory of an exotic incident with little beings that will be so fantastic as to detract away from the actual activity that the other men remember. Go on.
I also want to add that if you heard Pennington and Burroughs, they were talking about taking legal action to secure their records, which they should. Larry left the service with some of his original records. One of them was an Air Force medical form called Form 490. It was a form documenting a requested check on his eyes, which felt very badly immediately after this flash of light. We
Yeah, no, that's fine. There are three principal researchers, I think Peter would agree with us, three people in the world now that have looked at this case. Peter has worked closely with Larry Warren. I've worked closely with Holt, and Little and Moulton Howe has kind of like delved into all areas. So we would probably be regarded as the three principal investigators, hence why I will bow to Peter's expert knowledge in that particular area. Yeah? But in the limited time, I don't have time to go into that. But thank you, Peter, for that. And what I'm trying to do is say that this is a fantastic case, but it's also extremely complicated, because I do believe, I honestly believe that after 5 years of my research, that this case was an attempt, or there was a cover-up of kinds definitely in play to kind of do this down. And if you think about it, if you went down the disinformation implanted memory, which has happened on many occasions in other fields of wartime scenario, it's worked perfectly. Because what's happened over the years is, because Larry's account doesn't sit with John's account, you kind of set, well, what's that crazy man talking about? And it's worked perfectly. So it's not a harmonious story by any means. It's complicated. But when we strip away the bare bones, we're left with what we know is the Holt Memorandum. This is not in doubt. We're not in doubt that Jim Penniston and John Burroughs came across a landed triangular craft. Not in doubt. Was there physical trace evidence to support the landing of that craft? Yes, there was. The background radiation peaked 7 times higher in the 3 indentations. We also, not touched upon it because of the time, there was a brief radar contact on the first night. And I think there was a brief radar contact on the third night when Holt went out. Very brief. Couple of sweeps, gone. I recently came into possession of some information when somebody, when I was on Coast to Coast last year, rang in, and it's, if anybody listens to the show with me on Coast to Coast with Rob Simone, a guy rings in and says, yeah, I was there, and he hints that he knows a lot more. So I say on air, will you contact me? He contacts me by email, claims he's I think he said he was a colonel. And he said he was a colonel in a radar specialist and he was based there. We then start a dialogue of approximately 7 emails, very, very detailed emails of questions that I threw back at him because he appeared to know intimate knowledge from a radar point of view, saying that there was a track, that there was an object gone into the forest, and he was a radar expert. Potentially a major breakthrough. Being a detective, I threw back lots of questions for clarification. They're back. Clarifying. I said, okay, I want you to now go on the record for me. You don't have to go public, but you now have to prove who you say you are. And guess what? He didn't answer my emails at that point. But my gut feeling was that this guy knew something, because he came out with information which I've never revealed to anybody. It's really the first time I've talked about it. And I'm not going to really delve into it for the simple reason it's uncorroborated. If he'd have put his name to it and said, I'm Colonel So-so, there's my records, you can look me up, blah, 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 then he'd have been a source and I would have been happy with him. Then I could repeat the information. But because it's unsourced, uncorroborated, it's tantalizing hint that there was some very exotic radar equipment used purposely to track something in the forest on the night in question. But I can't really use it, so it might just be a made-up story. But if anybody's ever listened to Grant Cameron and the way that the CIA burn people, they sometimes deliberately throw a spanner in the works to a UFO researcher, thinking he's going to spill the beans because he can't get so excited that he'll just tell it all. And then they'll go, ha, 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 you believed us. Yeah? But what he also says is that people like Chase Brandon, who are still within the bounds of the law and are not able to reveal all that they can, they work around it by kind of meddling in stories, and they plant real information under a fictional basis. So this may be a kind of test for me. Would I do my job properly and just accept it and blow it out, uncorroborated, which I wouldn't do, therefore my credibility would suffer. Or maybe it was a genuine little attempt to just tickle the waters, put a little bit of information there, essentially is true, but until I get more, I can't go. And it only related to the first night. activity. But it was definitely, if this guy was true, anomalous. Okay, I'm going to wrap up shortly. I know I've kept you now. Well, what I would say is that I must apologise for the technical crew that cost us an half an hour delay, and I was only an hour. So by my reckoning, I've just done it in the hour. It's 10:30. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been a bit around the place. Thank you very much. Any quick questions whilst we're going?